The late afternoon sun hung low over the tarmac, casting long shadows from the sleek body of Flight AZ-617, a mid-sized jet bound for a short domestic hop. The air buzzed with the hum of engines and the faint chatter of passengers shuffling through the gate at Terminal C. It was an ordinary day at the airport, travelers in wrinkled suits dragging roller bags, families corralling kids with sticky hands, and the occasional solo flyer lost in a podcast. But ordinary days have a way of unraveling when you least expect it, and this one was about to catch fire. Marcus Tate stepped through the glass doors of the terminal, his polished leather shoes tapping softly against the linoleum. At 65, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd spent decades commanding courtrooms, though you wouldn't guess it from his appearance. No tailored suit, no flashy tie, just a simple navy coat, a crisp white shirt, and a pair of glasses perched on his nose. His graying hair was neatly trimmed, and his dark eyes held a sharpness that cut through the chaos around him. In his left hand he gripped a wooden cane, its tip clicking faintly with each step, a reminder of the knee he'd wrecked in a car accident years ago. In his right, a small leather satchel swung lightly, containing little more than a book and his boarding pass. He wasn't here to make a statement. Marcus had retired from the federal bench 2 years prior, trading gavels for garden shears and long trials for longer walks. Today he just wanted to get home, sink into his armchair, and sip tea while the world spun on without him. But Marcus Tate wasn't just a retired judge. He was a silent shareholder in the airline he was about to board, a fact buried deep in corporate ledgers and known only to a handful of executives. Not that he advertised it. He liked it that way, unseen, unassuming, a shadow moving through a world that rarely looked twice. The gate area was a hive of activity. Passengers jostled for position as the young gate agent, a wiry kid named Bilal with a headset dangling around his neck, scanned tickets with mechanical efficiency. Marcus approached, handed over his boarding pass, and waited as the scanner beeped its approval. "First class, seat 2A, Bilal muttered, barely glancing up. "You're good to go, sir. Enjoy your flight." Marcus nodded a small, polite dip of his chin and started down the jet bridge, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the carpeted floor. The bridge smelled of stale coffee and jet fuel, a familiar cocktail to anyone who'd flown more than once. Marcus didn't mind. He'd taken this route dozens of times, always preferring the simplicity of a short flight to the pomp of longer hauls. His steps were measured, deliberate, the kind of pace that suggested he'd learned patience the hard way. Ahead, the aircraft door loomed, a rectangle of light framed by the curved wall of the fuselage. He could hear the faint hum of the cabin crew prepping, inside trays clinking, voices murmuring. Just another flight. Or so he thought. At the threshold stood Lydia Harper, the lead flight attendant. At 45, she was a veteran of the skies, her uniform pressed to perfection, her auburn hair pulled into a tight bun that didn't dare let a strand escape. Her sharp green eyes flicked over every passenger with the precision of a hawk spotting prey, and her posture, hands clasped, shoulders squared, radiated control. 14 years on the job had honed her instincts, or so she believed. She'd seen it all. The seat stealers, the drunks, the entitled types who thought a boarding pass was a crown. Lydia didn't just manage the cabin. She ruled it. "Good afternoon, sir," she said as Marcus stepped aboard, her voice smooth but edged with routine. "May I see your boarding pass?" He handed it over without a word, his fingers steady. She glanced at it, seat 2A, first class, then up at him. Her smile faltered just for a split second, a tiny crack in her polished facade. A crease formed between her brows as she handed the pass back, but she didn't step aside. "And your ID, please," she added, her tone cooling like a breeze turning sharp. Marcus raised an eyebrow, the faintest twitch of surprise crossing his face. "You've seen my boarding pass," he said, his voice low and even, the kind that carried weight without volume. Behind him, the line of passengers slowed, heads tilting to catch the exchange. Lydia's lips tightened. Yes, she replied. But I need to verify your ID as well. Standard procedure. Her words were clipped, professional, but her eyes told a different story, narrowed, skeptical, as if something about him didn't add up. A murmur rippled through the queue. Marcus reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed over his driver's license. She took it, studied it longer than necessary, then flicked her gaze back to him. Marcus Tate, she read aloud, loud enough for the nearest passengers to hear. This doesn't match what I was expecting. Her voice rose slightly, a challenge wrapped in courtesy. Where did you get this ticket? The air thickened. A man in a rumpled blazer, two people back. James Carter, 38. A sales exec with a permanent scowl shifted his weight and muttered, "What's the holdup?" Beside him, a woman in a sleek blazer. Priya Patel, 32. A freelance journalist with a nose for a story slipped her phone from her pocket and tapped the camera on, angling it discreetly. Marcus didn't flinch. "I booked it online," he said, his tone steady as granite. "Same as everyone else." Lydia hesitated, her fingers tightening around his ID. "Step aside, please," she said, gesturing to the left. "I need to confirm this with the gate staff." Her voice was firm now, no room for negotiation. Marcus didn't argue. He moved to the side, cane tapping once, twice, as he positioned himself just past the door. The line surged forward, passengers brushing past him with quick, curious glances. Some avoided his eyes entirely, burying their faces in their phones. Others stared openly, like gawkers at a car wreck. Lydia turned away, her heels clicking as she strode to the cabin phone mounted near the galley. She punched in a number, her back rigid, her voice dropping to a hushed, urgent whisper. "This is Harper on AZ617. I've got a passenger in first-class seat 2A. ID says Marcus Tate, but it doesn't feel right. Can you double-check the manifest?" She paused, listening, her free hand tapping restlessly against her thigh. From where he stood, Marcus couldn't hear the reply, but he didn't need to. He'd been here before, not on this plane, not with this woman, but in 100 other rooms, 100 other lines, where someone looked at him and saw a question mark instead of a man. The jet bridge creaked as more passengers filed in, their footsteps a dull thud against the carpet. James Carter, now at the front of the line, handed over his pass with a grunt. "She's just doing her job," he said loudly, shooting a glance at Marcus. "Some people need to chill." His words hung in the air, a spark waiting for tinder. Priya, still filming, leaned toward the woman next to her, a middle-aged teacher with a paperback in hand, and whispered, "This could blow up. You watch." The teacher nodded, eyes wide, clutching her book like a shield. Minutes ticked by, slow and heavy. Marcus stood still, his cane planted firmly, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry, not yet. Anger was a tool he'd learned to wield carefully, not waste on petty battles. But there was a sting here, sharp and familiar, the kind that came from being singled out for no reason he could name aloud. He'd faced it in courtrooms when clerks assumed he was the defendant, not the judge. He'd felt it in stores when security trailed him down aisles. And now, here on a plane he partly owned, it was happening again. Lydia hung up the phone and turned back, her face a mask of forced calm. Before she could speak, a new figure appeared at the door, a ground supervisor named Rizwan, mid-30s, with a clipboard and a harried look. He'd clearly been dragged from some other crisis, his tie askew, his forehead glistening with sweat. "What's the issue?" he asked, voice clipped. Lydia handed him Marcus's ID. "This passenger. First class. I don't think he matches the profile." Rizwan glanced at the ID, then at Marcus, then back at the ID. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke in a low, rapid tone. "Yeah, it's Rizwan. Check a name for me, Marcus Tate. AZ617, seat 2A. Priority list." A pause. His eyes widened, just a flicker, but enough for Marcus to catch it. Rizwan hung up, cleared his throat, and turned to Lydia. "He's cleared," he said, his voice firm. "Let him board. Now." Lydia blinked, her composure slipping. "But I thought—" "You thought wrong," Rizwan cut in, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "He's on the list. Move it." She stepped aside, her jaw tight, her eyes darting to Marcus. He gave her a slight nod, not warm, not cold, just a gesture, and started down the aisle. The cane tapped softly, a metronome to the silence that followed. Lydia's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She didn't like being overruled, not in her cabin, not in front of her passengers. But something about Rizwan's tone, the urgency, the edge told her this wasn't over. Marcus reached seat 2A, lowered himself into the leather chair, and set his cane beside him. The cabin hummed with pre-flight noise, overhead bins snapping shut, seat belts clicking, but around him it was quieter. Passengers nearby avoided his gaze, their curiosity masked by sudden interest in their trays or windows. James Carter, seated a few rows back, muttered something to his neighbor about overreacting old guys. Priya in 4C kept her phone low, the red recording dot still glowing. She'd caught it all, the exchange, the delay, the supervisor's rush. "This is gold," she whispered to herself, already drafting a headline in her mind. Lydia returned to her post at the door, her smile back in place, though it didn't reach her eyes. She greeted the last stragglers with mechanical cheer, her mind racing. Who was he? Why the priority list? She'd worked this airline for 14 years, knew the regulars, the CEOs, the frequent flyers, the trust fund kids. Marcus Tate didn't fit. Not in that coat, not with that cane, not with that quiet. Something was off, and she hated not knowing what. Marcus settled into his seat, his hands resting on his lap, his eyes fixed on the seat back ahead. He wasn't new to this, the assumptions, the second-guessing, the subtle shove to prove he belonged. It had followed him his whole life, from the streets of his childhood to the marble halls of justice. But today it felt different. Today it wasn't just a sting. It was a spark. And as the engines rumbled to life beneath him, he knew this flight wouldn't end when the wheels hit the ground. The cabin door clicked shut. The jet bridge pulled away. And somewhere in the galley, Lydia Harper braced herself for a shift she couldn't yet see coming. The cabin of Flight AZ-617 hummed with the low drone of engines as the plane taxied toward the runway, its wheels rumbling against the asphalt like a heartbeat picking up pace. The overhead lights flickered briefly before settling into a warm glow, casting soft shadows across the rows of seats. In first class, the air was thick, not with the recycled staleness of a pressurized cabin, but with something heavier, something unspoken. Marcus Tate sat in seat 2A, his cane resting against the armrest, his hands folded calmly in his lap. His dark eyes stared straight ahead, fixed on the blank seatback, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene at the door. That sting, that familiar jab of being questioned, hadn't faded. It lingered, sharp and insistent, like a splinter under the skin. Around him, the other passengers settled in, their movements cautious, their glances fleeting. The man in 3BA wiry software exec named Naman fidgeted with his phone, stealing sideways looks at Marcus before burying his nose in an email. 2 rows back, Priya Patel adjusted her earbuds, her phone still tucked against her thigh, the recording app quietly capturing every rustle and whisper. James Carter, sprawled in 5A with his blazer unbuttoned, muttered something under his breath about first-class drama queens, loud enough for his neighbor to smirk but not loud enough to draw a response. No one wanted to be the first to break the silence. Not yet. At the front of the cabin, Lydia Harper stood with her arms crossed, her posture rigid as she surveyed her domain. The sharp crease of her uniform jacket seemed to mirror the edge in her expression, tight, controlled but fraying at the seams. She'd brushed off the incident at the door, or so she told herself. Rizwan's clipped "he's cleared" still echoed in her ears, a rebuke she couldn't shake. Who was this Marcus Tate? Why the priority list? She'd spent 14 years reading passengers like open books, their clothes, their posture, their tone, and he didn't fit the script. No Rolex, no swagger, just a cane and a coat that looked like it belonged in Coach. It gnawed at her, that mismatch, that unanswered question. The seatbelt sign chimed off with a soft ding, and the cabin stirred to life. Lydia snapped into action, her heels clicking as she moved to the galley, her hands reaching for the drink cart with practiced precision. "Let's get this over with," she muttered to Aisha Khan, the junior attendant hovering nearby. Aisha, 28, with her dark hair tied back and a nervous energy in her step, nodded but didn't meet Lydia's eyes. She'd seen the exchange at the door, heard the edge in Lydia's voice, and something about it sat wrong with her like a chord struck off key. The cart rolled out, its wheels squeaking faintly against the carpeted aisle. Lydia plastered on her service smile, the one she'd perfected over a decade of flights, and began her rounds. "Good afternoon, sir. Sparkling water? Wine?" Her voice was honey-sweet as she poured for the woman in 1C, a polished executive with diamond studs glinting in her ears. "Ma'am, anything for you?" she asked 2B, a middle-aged lawyer who nodded absently, engrossed in a legal brief. She moved with efficiency, her hands steady, her tone warm until she reached Marcus. She slowed, her cart stopping just shy of his row. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her, just sat there with that infuriating calm. Lydia's smile tightened, her fingers curling around the edge of the tray. "Sir," she said, her voice losing its warmth, "would you like something to drink?" Marcus turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. They were steady, piercing, the kind of gaze that made you feel seen in a way you didn't want to be. "Water's fine," he said, his tone flat but firm. Lydia reached for a glass, her movements sharp, deliberate. She filled it from the pitcher, the ice clinking louder than it should have, and set it on the tray. But as she leaned forward to hand it to him, her elbow nudged the tray just enough. The glass tipped, wobbled, and then fell, splashing cold water across Marcus's lap and soaking his coat. A gasp rippled through the cabin. Nauman's head jerked up from his phone. Priya's eyes widened, her thumb hovering over her screen. James Carter let out a low chuckle, muttering, "Clumsy much?" "Oh!" Lydia exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth in a show of surprise that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so sorry, sir. I must have slipped. Let me get you a napkin." She grabbed a stack from the cart and thrust them at him, her tone dripping with false regret. Marcus didn't move at first. He just sat there, water pooling on his trousers, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he took the napkins and began blotting the mess, his movements deliberate, almost methodical. "Ko Kong Vung," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the hum of the cabin. "Ko Chi Kong Muon Tuao Day." The words landed like a slap, stripped of anger but loaded with truth. Lydia froze, her hand still clutching the cart. The passengers nearby stopped pretending to ignore him. Nauman's phone slipped to his lap. Priya leaned forward, her camera catching every second. A woman in 3C, a quiet retiree named Sadia, whispered to her husband, "She did that on purpose." Lydia's face flushed, a hot red creeping up her neck. "That's ridiculous," she snapped, her voice louder than she intended. "It was an accident. I'd never." "Then why'd you skip me earlier?" Marcus interrupted, his tone still calm but sharper now, like a blade unsheathed. "You served everyone else first. No hesitation. No spills." He held her gaze, unblinking, and the cabin went still. Even the engines seemed to quiet, as if the plane itself was holding its breath. "I was busy," Lydia shot back, her composure cracking. "I don't play favorites." "But you do judge," Marcus said, his voice low, steady. "You judged me the second I walked in, and now you're punishing me for it." A shout broke the tension. "She's punishing him, all right." It was James Carter, leaning out of his seat, His face twisted with a mix of amusement and irritation. "Lady, just apologize and move on. This is getting old." His words sparked a murmur, some nods, some glares. Priya muttered under her breath, "Keep talking, buddy. This is prime footage." Lydia's jaw clenched, her eyes darting between Marcus and the growing restlessness around her. She opened her mouth to retort, but Aisha stepped in, her voice soft but firm. "Lydia, let's go. Back to the galley. Now." She grabbed the cart and tugged it forward, forcing Lydia to follow. The older woman resisted for a moment, her heels digging into the carpet, then relented, storming off with a huff. In the galley, hidden behind the curtain, the air exploded. "What the hell was that?" Aisha hissed, her hands on her hips. "You just dumped water on him." "It was an accident," Lydia snapped, her voice rising. "He's making a scene over nothing." "Nothing." Aisha's eyes flashed. "You've been on him since he boarded. You questioned his ticket, you delayed him, and now this? You know who he is, don't you?" "I don't care who he is," Lydia shot back, her hands trembling. "I don't like being second-guessed in my own cabin." "You're not being second-guessed," Aisha said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You're being caught." The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Lydia turned away, gripping the counter, her knuckles white. She could feel the heat of the cabin pressing in, the weight of eyes she couldn't see but knew were watching. She'd lost control of the situation, of herself, and it terrified her. Aisha stared at her for a moment longer, then shook her head and started stacking cups, her movements sharp with frustration. Back in first class, Marcus wiped the last of the water from his coat, his face calm but his mind racing. He wasn't surprised, not really. He'd seen this play out too many times, the subtle jabs escalating into something bolder when the mask slipped. But this wasn't a courtroom where he could call order. This was a plane 30,000 feet in the air, and he was trapped in it with a woman who decided he was the enemy. Naaman cleared his throat, leaning across the aisle. "That wasn't right," he said quietly, his voice unsteady. "She shouldn't have done that." Marcus glanced at him, his expression neutral. "She didn't have to," he replied. "But she did." Naaman nodded, then sank back into his seat, guilt flickering in his eyes. Sadia, 2 rows back, leaned forward. "Sir, I saw it. It wasn't an accident. I'll say something if you want." Marcus gave her a faint nod. "Appreciated," he said. "But not yet." Priya's voice cut through the quiet. "This is insane," she muttered, loud enough for nearby seats to hear. "She's picking a fight with the wrong guy." Her phone buzzed, a text from a colleague. "Send me that clip ASAP. This could go big." She smirked, her fingers flying over the screen. The video was already at 5 minutes and counting, every frame a potential bombshell. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and oblivious. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 35,000 feet. Should be a smooth ride from here. Crew will resume service shortly." The announcement did little to ease the tension. If anything, it sharpened it, a reminder that this wasn't over. Lydia would be back, and Marcus knew it. In the galley, Lydia poured herself a paper cup of water, her hands shaking as she gulped it down. "I've handled worse," she muttered to herself, but the words felt hollow. She dealt with rowdy drunks, screaming kids, even a guy who tried to sneak into first class with a fake ticket. But this was different. This was personal, and she didn't know why. Aisha watched her, arms crossed. "You sure he's not someone?" she asked. Rizwan acted like he was a big deal. "Rizwan's a pushover," Lydia said, tossing the cup into the trash. "He's just some old guy with a chip on his shoulder." "Then why's he in 2A? Aisha pressed. "Why'd they clear him so fast?" Lydia didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she straightened her jacket, smoothed her hair, and grabbed the card again. "I'm finishing service," she said, her voice tight. Stay out of my way. She rolled the cart back into the aisle, her smile back in place, but it was brittle now, a mask ready to crack. She served Naaman, then Sadia, her hands steady but her eyes avoiding Marcus. When she reached his row again, she paused, her breath catching. Anything else, sir? She asked, her tone clipped. Marcus looked up, his gaze steady. Not from you, he said simply. The dismissal was quiet, but it hit like a thunderclap. James Carter laughed, a harsh bark that echoed through the cabin. Oh, she's done for now, he said, grinning at his neighbor. Guy's got stones. Priya's camera caught it all, the laugh, the tension, the way Lydia's face twitched before she turned and marched back to the galley. Sadia whispered to her husband, he's not backing down. Good for him. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his wet coat draped over the armrest, his mind settling into a familiar rhythm. He'd faced worse than spilled water, hostile witnesses, biased juries, threats scrawled on courthouse steps. This was nothing new, just louder, Messier. But it wasn't about the water. It was about what came next. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a quick message to an old friend. Faraz. Flight staff issue. Escalating. Keep an eye out. The reply came fast, on it. Don't let her slide. The plane droned on, cutting through the clouds, but inside the storm was just beginning. Lydia's pride, Marcus's resolve, and a cabin full of witnesses were locked in a dance that wouldn't end until the wheels hit the grounder, until someone broke. And Marcus Tate, retired judge and silent shareholder, wasn't the breaking kind. The cabin of Flight AZ-617 sliced through the sky at 35,000 feet, a silver dart piercing the clouds, but inside the air was anything but smooth. The hum of the engines couldn't drown out the tension that had settled like a fog over first class. Marcus Tate sat in seat 2A, his damp coat folded neatly over the armrest, his cane propped beside him like a sentinel. The water stain on his trousers had dried into a faint shadow, but the memory of Lydia Harper's accident lingered, sharp and wet, in the minds of everyone who'd seen it. His dark eyes flicked to the window, where the horizon tilted faintly as the plane began its descent. He wasn't angry, not yet. Anger was a luxury he'd learned to ration, but he was done waiting. Around him, the passengers were restless, their earlier silence giving way to a low buzz of unease. Naaman in 3B tapped his foot nervously, his phone forgotten on the tray table. Sadia, 2 rows back, whispered to her husband, her voice tight with indignation. She's pretending it didn't happen. Priya Patel, still filming from 4C, adjusted her angle to catch the galley curtain, where Lydia had disappeared after her last terse exchange with Marcus. James Carter, slouched in 5A, cracked his knuckles and muttered, "This flight's a circus," loud enough to draw a few nods. The cabin wasn't a powder keg, not quite, but the fuse was lit, and everyone could smell the smoke. In the galley, Lydia leaned against the counter, her arms folded so tightly her nails dug into her sleeves. The paper cup she drained earlier sat crumpled in the trash, a small rebellion against the chaos swirling in her head. Her bun was still perfect, her uniform still crisp, but her face told a different story, pale, strained, with a flicker of something close to panic in her green eyes. She'd lost the thread, and she knew it. The spill, the confrontation. Aisha's words, they'd stripped away the control she'd spent 14 years building. "I'm fine," she snapped at Aisha, who stood nearby, arranging trays with a quiet intensity. "You don't look fine," Aisha replied, her voice low but pointed. "You look like you're about to snap." "I don't snap," Lydia shot back, her tone brittle. "I handle things. Unlike some people." Aisha's hand stilled, her dark eyes narrowing. "You handled him all right. Right into a mess." Lydia turned away, her breath shallow. "He's just some guy. I've dealt with worse." "Then why are you shaking?" Aisha asked, stepping closer. "You know he's not just some guy." Rizwan's face said it. "You're in over your head." Before Lydia could retort, the intercom crackled. The captain's voice cut through, calm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Crew, prepare for landing. The words snapped Lydia back into motion. She grabbed a clipboard, her fingers fumbling as she checked off task seatbelts, trays, bins. Routine was her lifeline, and she clung to it like a drowning woman to a raft. Aisha watched her, then turned away, her silence louder than any argument. Out in the cabin, Lydia emerged from the galley, her posture stiff, her smile a thin veneer. She moved down the aisle, checking belts with mechanical precision. "Seatbelt on, please," she said to Naaman, who complied without a word. "Tray up," she told Sadia, who met her eyes with a cool stare before obeying. When she reached Marcus, she hesitated, her hand hovering over his tray table. He'd already fastened his belt, his posture impeccable. "Landing in 10, she said, her voice clipped. "Anything else you need?" "Not from you," Marcus repeated, his tone unchanged, quiet, firm, final. Lydia's face twitched, a crack in her mask, but she turned and walked away, her heels clicking faster now. She could feel the eyes on her. Naaman's guilt, Sadia's judgment, Priya's camera lens like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Back at the front, she braced herself against the wall, her heart pounding loud enough to drown out the engines. She'd never feared a landing before, but this one felt different. This one wasn't just a stop, it was a reckoning. Marcus watched her go, his expression unreadable. He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped out another message to Faraz. "She's doubling down. No apology. Ignoring me now." The reply buzzed back instantly, "Board's aware. Stay put after landing. It's handled." Marcus locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his coat. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't here to be erased either. Not today. The plane dipped, the cabin tilting as it aligned with the runway. Outside, the city sprawled into view, grids of lights, ribbons of highways, the airport a blinking beacon in the dusk. The wheels whirred beneath the floor, ready to bite the tarmac. Inside, the passengers braced themselves, but no one relaxed. They were waiting for the landing, for the fallout, for something to break the deadlock that had gripped the flight since takeoff. The wheels hit with a jolt, a soft thud followed by the roar of reverse thrust. The cabin shuddered, then steadied as the plane slowed, taxiing toward the gate. The captain's voice returned. "Welcome to your destination. Local time is 3:47 p.m. Please remain seated until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is off. Thank you for flying with us." The sign dinged off, but no one moved. Not Naaman, not Sadia, not even James, who'd stopped cracking his knuckles and sat up straighter, sensing the shift. Lydia stood at the door, headset on, her hand trembling as she pressed the call button. "This is Harper AZ617. We've landed." Awaiting clearance to open door 1. A pause, then a clipped response. "Hold for instruction." Executives boarding momentarily. Her stomach dropped. Executives? Plural? She turned, her eyes scanning the cabin, landing on Marcus. He sat still, cane in hand, his calm unnerving her more than any shout could have. A soft knock sounded from the outside. Aisha moved to open the door, and 3 figures stepped aboard, their presence sucking the air from the room. First came Omar Siddiq, 50, director of airline operations, his dark suit crisp, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him was Sajid, head of crew training, his expression unreadable, a clipboard tucked under his arm. Last was a uniformed airport security officer, his badge glinting in the cabin light. Heads turned, breaths caught. Priya's camera shifted to follow them, her pulse racing. James leaned forward, whispering, "Oh, this is good." Omar didn't waste time. He strode forward, his steps deliberate, and stopped in front of Lydia. She straightened, her hands clasped, her throat tight. "Monica, sorry, Lydia," he said, his voice low but cutting. "You're coming with us. Now." The cabin went dead silent. Naaman's foot stopped tapping. Sadia's husband gripped her hand. Priya zoomed in, catching the flicker of fear in Lydia's eyes. Lydia swallowed hard. "Sir, Save it," Omar interrupted, his tone ice-cold. "Hand your badge to Sajid." Her heart stopped. Her badge? 14 years, thousands of flights, countless compliments. Every promotion earned reduced to this? Her hands shook as she unclipped the metal ID from her jacket, the click echoing in the stillness. She passed it to Sajid, who took it without a word and slipped it into his pocket. The gesture was simple, clinical, but to Lydia it was a guillotine dropping. Omar's eyes flicked to Marcus, a brief acknowledgement, then back to Lydia. "You stopped a priority passenger," he said, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "You questioned his ticket, delayed boarding, and then what? Spilled water on him? Ignored him after." "It was an accident," Lydia stammered, her voice cracking. "I followed protocol." "No, you followed your gut," Omar cut in, stepping closer. "And your gut was wrong. He's Marcus Tate, federal judge, retired, and a shareholder in this airline. You didn't just disrespect a passenger. You disrespected us." The words hit like a shockwave. Naaman's jaw dropped. Sadia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. James let out a low whistle, muttering, "Well, damn." Priya's camera trembled slightly, her mind already spinning with headlines. "Flight attendant humiliates airline owner mid-flight." Lydia's face drained of color, her legs wobbling beneath her. "I didn't know," she whispered, barely audible. "You didn't ask," Omar said. "You assumed. And now you're done here." He turned to the security officer. "Escort her off. We'll handle the rest on the ground." The officer nodded, stepping forward. Lydia's eyes darted to Aisha, who looked away, her face a mix of pity and resolve. "Let's go," the officer said, his voice firm but not unkind. Lydia hesitated, then followed, her steps heavy, her head bowed. As she passed Marcus, she risked a glance. He met her eyes, his gaze steady, not triumphant, not cruel, just there. It was worse than anger. It was disappointment, and it burned. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, leaving a vacuum in its wake. Omar turned to Marcus, his tone softening. "Mr. Tate, I apologize. This shouldn't have happened. We'll debrief fully at the gate." Marcus nodded once, a slight dip of his chin. "Appreciated," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Make sure it doesn't happen again." "It won't," Omar replied, a promise etched in his tone. The passengers watched in stunned silence as Omar and Sajid exited, the security officer trailing behind. Aisha stepped forward, her hands clasped, her voice shaky as she addressed the cabin. "We'll begin disembarking shortly. Please remain seated." No one argued. No one moved. The weight of what they'd witnessed pressed down, heavy and real. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his cane tapping once against the floor. He wasn't gloating, never had been the type. But he felt the shift, the ripples starting to spread. His phone buzzed. Froze again. Board's furious. "She's toast." "You okay?" Marcus typed back, "Fine. It's not about me." He locked the screen and stared out the window, where the jet bridge loomed against the dusk. The flight was over, but the story wasn't. Not by a long shot. The cabin of Flight AZ-617 sat still at the gate, its engines silent, but the air inside thrummed with a restless energy. The door had clicked shut behind Lydia Harper minutes ago, her exit under Omar Siddique's stern command leaving a void that no one knew how to fill. Marcus Tate remained in seat 2A, his cane resting against his knee, his damp coat draped over the armrest like a battle-worn flag. His dark eyes traced the jet bridge through the window, where shadows moved against the glass. Executives, security, and a woman who just lost everything she'd built over 14 years. He didn't move, didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence filled the space, a quiet force that held the cabin in its grip. Around him, the passengers sat frozen, their earlier restlessness replaced by a stunned hush. Man in 3B stared at his hands, his phone dark on the tray table, guilt gnawing at him for staying silent too long. Sadia, 2 rows back, clutched her husband's arm, her voice a whisper. They took her badge. Right here. James Carter in 5A leaned back with a smirk, but even his bravado faltered, his eyes darting to Marcus with a mix of awe and unease. Priya Patel in 4C kept her phone low, the red recording dot still blinking as she captured the aftermath, every breath, every shuffle, every murmur. Her heart raced, her mind already spinning the story. Flight attendant fired mid-flight after harassing VIP. Outside, beyond the jet bridge, Lydia stumbled into the terminal, her heels unsteady on the polished floor. The security officer flanked her, his hand hovering near her elbow, not touching, but close enough to guide. Omar and Sajid walked ahead, their suits stark against the fluorescent lights, their voices low and clipped as they spoke into phones. Lydia's badge was gone, a cold absence where it had hung for over a decade, and with it the armor she'd worn through every takeoff and landing. Her face was pale, her green eyes wide and glassy, but her jaw was set, clinging to the last shred of pride she could muster. She didn't cry, not yet. That would come later, alone where no one could see. Inside the cabin, Aisha Khan stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly, her voice trembling as she addressed the passengers. We'll begin disembarking in a moment. Please remain seated until instructed. Thank you. Her words were rote, but her eyes betrayed her, darting to Marcus, then away, a flicker of regret in their depths. She'd challenged Lydia, pushed her, but this was more than she'd expected. The passengers nodded mutely, their gazes shifting between Aisha and Marcus, waiting for the next move in a game no one had signed up to play. The jet bridge door creaked open again, and a young gate agent, Ikra, her name tag read, stepped aboard. She was small, nervous, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Mr. Tate, she said, her voice soft but clear, your car's waiting. You're free to disembark first. Marcus didn't rush. He rose slowly, his cane tapping the floor with a steady rhythm, and gathered his satchel and coat. The passengers watched, their eyes following him as he moved down the aisle. Naman with a nod, Sadia with a faint smile, James with a grudging respect. Priya's camera tracked him, her breath catching as he passed. At the door she couldn't hold back. Mr. Tate, she called, half standing. I'm a journalist, Priya Patel. Can I get a statement? This needs to be heard. Marcus paused, turning slightly, his gaze calm but piercing. The truth speaks for itself, he said simply, then stepped onto the jet bridge. Priya sank back, her mind racing. That clip, 5 minutes of raw footage, was already uploading to her cloud, a ticking bomb ready to detonate. Outside, a black sedan idled at the curb, its driver a tall man in a crisp suit holding the door open. Omar stood nearby, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low murmur. Yes, sir. She's off the plane. Tate's secure. We'll debrief in 10. He nodded at Marcus as he approached, a silent apology in his eyes. Marcus slid into the back seat, his cane resting across his lap, and the door closed with a soft thud. The car pulled away, gliding past the terminal's glass walls, where Lydia's silhouette faded into the crowd. Back in the cabin, the passengers finally stirred, their movements sluggish, as if waking from a trance. Ikra called out Rose, her voice steadying with each number. Naman grabbed his bag, muttering to himself, should have said something sooner. Sadia stood, her husband helping with her carry-on, her voice firm. That woman got what she deserved. James smirked, hauling his blazer over his shoulder. Hell of a show, he said, but his tone lacked its earlier bite. Priya lingered, her phone buzzing with notifications, her colleagues' texts. Uploads live. Send it now. She hit share, and the video leapt into the ether. A 5-minute saga of Lydia's scorn, Marcus's calm, and Omar's hammer drop. Within minutes, it hit X, tagged with AZ617 and airline fail. Comments flooded in. She dumped water on him? WTF. That guy owns the airline? Legendary. Fire her yesterday. The views climbed 10, 000, 20,000, 50, 000, each ping a nail in Lydia's coffin. Across the city, Lydia sat in a sterile airport office, her hands folded in her lap, her uniform jacket unbuttoned. Sajid sat across from her, his clipboard open, his tone neutral. You'll report to HR tomorrow. Suspension's immediate. Hearings next week. Lydia nodded, her throat tight. I was doing my job, she said, her voice hoarse. Sajid didn't blink. Your job doesn't include targeting passengers. She looked away, her eyes burning, the reality sinking in. 14 years gone in a flash. Marcus's car rolled through the airport exit, the city lights smearing past the tinted windows. His phone buzzed. Faraz, video's out. It's everywhere. You're trending. Marcus didn't check it. He didn't need to. He'd seen the camera, felt the shift. Instead he texted back, good. Let it spread. Faraz replied, boards scrambling. Policy reviews on. You started a fire. Marcus locked the screen and leaned back, the hum of the engine a faint comfort. He wasn't after fame or revenge, just a crack in the wall, wide enough for light to slip through. Back at the gate, the last passengers trickled out. Aisha stayed behind, stacking trays with mechanical precision, her mind replaying Lydia's fall. Was she fired? Priya had asked as she'd passed. No one said it, Aisha replied. But they didn't have to. Priya nodded, her eyes sharp. She'll think about this one. Aisha didn't answer, but she hoped so. She'd liked Lydia, once respected her. Even but that was before today, before the mask slipped. The terminal buzzed with whispers as passengers dispersed. Naaman lingered by the gate, his guilt a heavy weight. He'd apologized to Marcus, late and small, but it wasn't enough. Sadia and her husband headed for baggage claim, her voice rising. He didn't even flinch. That's power. James swaggered off, muttering about crazy flights. But his smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of doubt. Priya stayed, uploading stills from her video. Lydia's sneer, Marcus's calm, Omar's cold stare. Her ex-post hit 100,000 views, then 200,000. The internet igniting with outrage and awe. By nightfall, the story had legs. News outlets picked it up, flight attendant removed after clash with airline shareholder, and talking heads debated on cable. Was it racism? Classism? Just a bad day. The airline's PR team scrambled, drafting a vague statement. We're investigating an incident on flight AZ617. We take passenger treatment seriously. But the video spoke louder, its raw truth cutting through the spin. Hashtags multiplied, justice for Tate, boycott AZ617, each one a spark in a growing fire. Lydia reached her car in the employee lot, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. She slid inside, slammed the door, and sat there staring at the dashboard. Her phone buzzed, texts from colleagues. What happened? You okay? She didn't reply. Then a notification popped, you've been X alert. She tapped it, and there it was, Priya's video, her own voice sneering. Where'd you get this ticket? Followed by the spill, Marcus's quiet defiance, Omar's cold command. Her stomach churned, her breath hitching. She scrolled the comments, disgraceful. She's done. Who does she think she is? And the tears came hot and fast, spilling down her cheeks. Not for the job, not for the badge, but for the mirror the world had just held up to her face. Marcus's car pulled into his quiet neighborhood, the streetlights casting soft pools of gold. The driver parked, opened the door, and Marcus stepped out, his cane tapping the pavement. He paused, breathing in the cool evening air, the faint scent of rain on the breeze. His phone buzzed again. Omar. She's suspended. Board's meeting tomorrow. Your call on next steps. Marcus didn't reply right away. He wasn't here to punish, not really. But he wasn't here to let it slide either. He typed back. Make it right. That's all. Inside the terminal, Priya's video hit 1 million views, the internet ablaze with reactions, some cheering Marcus, some vilifying Lydia, others demanding answers from the airline. Naaman, Sadia, and James carried the story home, each with their own version, their own shame or pride. Aisha clocked out, her hands still trembling, her mind on Lydia's empty locker. And Lydia, alone in her car, watched her world crumble, one view at a time. The flight was over, but the runway stretched into headlines, boardrooms, and a reckoning no one could outrun. The sun rose over the city 2 days after Flight AZ-617 touched down, its light filtering through the haze of a new morning. The airport hummed as always, planes roaring off runways, travelers dragging suitcases, but beneath the routine, something had shifted. Marcus Tate sat in his study, a modest room lined with bookshelves and the faint ticking of a clock. A cold cup of tea rested on his desk untouched as he scrolled through the airline's website on his laptop. A press release stared back at him, crisp and concise. We are reviewing in-flight service procedures following a recent incident. Our commitment to dignity, fairness, and respect for all passengers remains unwavering. Updated crew training will begin immediately. No names, no details, just a quiet promise. Marcus read it twice, his dark eyes narrowing. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was a start. His phone buzzed beside him. Faraz. Board's shaken. Policies are moving fast. You cracked the shell. Marcus didn't smile, but a faint warmth settled in his chest. He typed back. Good. Keep it cracking. He set the phone down and leaned back, his cane propped against the chair. He wasn't naive. Words on a screen didn't erase decades of quiet bias, but he'd learned long ago that change didn't come in thunderclaps. It came in ripples, slow and steady until the tide turned. Across town, Lydia Harper sat on a worn couch in her small apartment, her navy blouse wrinkled, her hair loose for the first time in years. The TV flickered in the background, a news anchor dissecting AZ-617. The viral video has sparked outrage, with calls for accountability growing louder. Her phone lay silent, no texts, no calls, just the echo of Priya's footage replaying in her mind. She'd watched it once late last night, her own voice sneering. Where'd you get this ticket? Followed by the spill, Marcus's calm, Omar's cold command. The comments, she's a bully. Hope she's fired for good, had cut deeper than she'd expected. She hadn't cried again since the car, but her hands trembled as she clutched a mug of coffee, now gone cold. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. Lydia flinched, then shuffled to the door. A courier stood there, holding a manila envelope. Harper, he asked. She nodded, signed, and took it, her heart sinking as she recognized the airline's logo. Inside was a letter, formal, typed, merciless. Your suspension is effective immediately. A disciplinary hearing is scheduled for next week. Attendance is mandatory. She sank back onto the couch, the paper slipping from her fingers. 14 years, every early morning, every turbulent flight, every forced smile reduced to this. She thought she was protecting her cabin, her rules. Now she saw it for what it was. A wall she'd built brick by brick out of fear. Back at Marcus's house, a second envelope waited on his kitchen tablet, an invitation from the airline board. We request your presence at a private policy review meeting as a shareholder. Your insight is valued. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he stepped onto his back porch, the morning air cool against his skin. His garden bloomed quietly, roses, lavender, a testament to the patience he'd cultivated since retiring. He wasn't sure he wanted a seat at their table, not yet. He'd spent decades behind a bench, handing down justice. Now he just wanted to live, to breathe, to know his dignity wasn't a fight he had to keep winning. A week later, the airline's operations center buzzed with a different energy. A training hall filled with rows of chairs, each occupied by a mix of flight attendants, ground crew, and managers, some curious, some tense, all aware this wasn't business as usual. The screen at the front glowed with 3 words: dignity, equality, accountability. No music, no fanfare, just the shuffle of feet and the rustle of notebooks. Aisha Khan slipped into the 3rd row, her uniform crisp, her eyes scanning the room. Lydia wasn't there, her hearing loomed. Her fate still in limbo, but Aisha felt her absence like a ghost. Omar Siddiq stood at the front, reviewing notes, his suit as sharp as his resolve. He'd pushed for this, demanded it after the video hit 1 million views. Then 2. The board had balked at first, citing costs, optics, but Marcus's name had tipped the scales. Omar glanced at the back door, waiting. Then it opened and Marcus stepped in, his gray blazer understated, his cane tapping softly. The room turned, a ripple of recognition spreading. He didn't rush, never had, just walked to the front, his presence commanding without a word. People stood, not ordered but instinctive, a quiet salute to the man in 2A. Omar shook his hand, brief and firm, then stepped aside. Marcus took the podium, no notes, no fanfare, just his voice low, steady, cutting through the silence like a blade through fog. "I didn't ask to be here," he began, his eyes sweeping the room. "I didn't want to stand in front of you with a title or a story. I just wanted to fly home that day quietly like anyone else. But someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong. Not because of my ticket, but because of my skin, my coat, my cane." The room stilled, breaths held. Aisha's pen froze mid-note. A senior trainer in the back shifted uncomfortably, her clipboard forgotten. Marcus stepped from the podium, his cane tapping as he paced the stage. "It wasn't just her," he said. "It was the silence around her, good people who said nothing, who let it happen. I've seen it in courtrooms, classrooms, everywhere. Silence is where bias hides. And it's where it grows." He stopped, his gaze settling on the front row. "You're here to change that. Not with slogans or checklists, but with choices. If you can memorize safety codes, you can learn to see past your assumptions. If you can handle emergencies, you can handle respect. This isn't about might, it's about the next person in 2A, or 20C, or anywhere else you decide doesn't fit your picture." A pause, heavy and deliberate. Then quieter. "From today, if this airline wants to soar, it starts on the ground with fairness, not just rules." He nodded once, then returned to his seat. The room stayed silent for a beat. Then a single clap broke it, slow, tentative, then joined by others, a steady wave of recognition, not loud but real. Marcus sat, his cane across his knees, his face calm. He wasn't here for applause. He was here for the shift. A month later, AZ-617 wasn't just a flight number, it was a lesson. Training rooms buzzed with case studies, whispered questions. What really happened? How do we stop it? Crew manuals thicken with new pages. Before you question, ask why you're questioning. And orientation shifted, pairing procedures with empathy. Marcus didn't attend every session, but his shadow lingered, a retired judge who'd rewritten the airline's code without a gavel. Lydia's hearing came and went, her suspension upheld, her career in limbo. She didn't fight it, not with words anyway. Instead, she wrote a letter, typed and mailed to Marcus's home. "I saw you as a mistake, not a man. That was my failure. I thought I was guarding my space. I was guarding my fear. I'm sorry, not for my job, but for what I didn't see." Marcus read it in his study, folded it, and tucked it away. He didn't reply. Some truths didn't need words, they needed time. The airline's board met downtown, Zara Malik at the helm, her slides stark. Crew satisfaction up, complaints down, passengers reporting kindness unprompted. A footnote glowed on the screen. AZ-617, standard rewritten. Omar texted Marcus that night. "Training's permanent. Want a board seat?" Marcus replied. "I'll think on it." He wasn't chasing titles, just change. On his porch, Marcus watched the evening settle, the breeze rustling his garden. His phone buzzed with a photo him at the training hall, surrounded by trainees listening, learning. He smiled faintly. The next Marcus Tate wouldn't be stopped at the door not because of him alone, but because a crack had widened, and the silence had lost its grip. The evening breeze faded as Marcus stepped back inside, the glow of his porch light flickering off behind him. His story Flight AZ-617 didn't end with a courtroom bang or a Hollywood explosion. But isn't that how real life works? No capes, no villains twirling mustaches, just ordinary people. A spilled glass of water, and a viral video that shook an airline awake. Sound familiar? Scroll X or TikTok any day and you'll see it. A flight attendant meltdown, a passenger's quiet clapback, the internet lighting up like a Christmas tree. Marcus's tale is an ancient historiet's last Tuesday with better lighting. Here's the kicker, folks. Lydia didn't wake up thinking, today, I'll be the poster child for Check Your Bias 101. Nope, she just forgot the golden rule: don't judge a book by its cover, especially if that book owns the bookstore. Lesson learned the hard way, with a side of public humiliation. So what's your takeaway? Next time you're side-eyeing someone in line at the airport, the grocery store, wherever, ask yourself, am I Lydia right now or am I Marcus? Tell us in the comments what's one time you misjudged someone and got schooled. We're all ears. Oh, and don't fly off just yet, hit that subscribe button. More stories like Marcus's are taxiing down the runway, and you won't want to miss takeoff. See you in the next one.